Welcome back, everyone. Hope that you guys were able to glean a little bit of information from part one, and we're going to go ahead and start part two now, looking at the different topics that are going to be seen or learned about in school. I think that you guys are aware each school has their own curriculum. Some are more maybe artistic based, some are more science or STEM based. But as you look at this, we're going to see the first things that are going to be taught within schools having to do more with religious areas of study. First is going to be Bible study. You're also going to see them looking back at the early church fathers, what they had written, people that had established a church very early on, and saying what some of the key ideas that they had expressed were going to be. A final area that they're going to be diving into are going to be some of the things that the church has mandated, decrees that these councils, gatherings of cardinals and other important leaders have now decided the church is going to carry out. And now, as we look at these things, I think in many ways, because most of these students are thinking about entering into the priesthood or even going up the ladder, these things were going to be really important. Most everyday folk were not going to necessarily be studying these things because they didn't need them. But those that were thinking about church involvement, these things would have been very, very appropriate. As we see these schools, though, moving on, you're going to see them expanding. They're saying, you know what, we don't necessarily want to just be constrained with just religious studies. We want to now think about a liberal arts education. Some of you guys are aware what a liberal arts education might consist of, but this idea of liberal arts is going to be, instead of it being a focused area of study, so like engineering or applied mathematics, something like that, you're going to be studying a whole host of different subjects, things that are going to be across the board, a wide array of different subjects. A couple things that they're going to be studying, it's going to be broken down into 7 total topics. There's going to be a grouping called the trivium and another one called the quadrivium. So let's go ahead and start, if we could, with the trivium. They're going to be studying obviously some of the more ancient ideas in terms of the past. So we're talking about like Rome. These things would have been very much appreciated within Rome. But grammar, as we think about reading and writing in Latin, that was going to be one of the key areas that students would be studying. Another one is going to be logic, how you think, being able to logically work through and arrive at an argument, at least in the way that one puts it together. But the last area is going to be rhetoric. Some of you guys might be aware of logic and being able to understand that. However, rhetoric is kind of a lost art or something that most people don't really talk about a whole lot. And that's going to be the ability or art of speaking, being able to convince people based on your words. So again, it's going to be grammar and logic and rhetoric. Those all make up what is called the trivium. However, on the other side is going to be something called the quadrivium. That's going to be arithmetic, so again, more basic math, geometry, angles and shapes. Some of you guys are in that right now and are thriving, and others of you hate the angles that you're having to deal with. Some of you guys have already worked through proofs, and if you have, kudos to you. But if you haven't dealt with geometry, I don't want to spoil that for you. You'll be able to enjoy that very much in quotes someday. Anyhow, geometry. You're also looking at astronomy and music, all different things that are going to make up the quadrivium. So arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. Well, as we think about books, we had talked about even within the Byzantines, them beginning to use books, but in general, they're still fairly rare. It's not like they're going to be frequently seen, mainly due to the fact that they were very expensive. This isn't something that you could just throw in a printer and all of a sudden it would now spit out a book. Instead, they would have to copy it by hand. And many times this would take a long while. This isn't something that would just flow necessarily. It would take a long time, usually because they were works of art. These guys, many times priests or monks, would sit for days and be able, obviously going to sleep, but being able to copy them all by hand, flowery writing calligraphy basically, and then many times the first page of a chapter would have a little bit more art connected with it. So in general, these were not only works of art, but they were very expensive and they would take a long time to be able to put together. But that doesn't mean that somehow they were superior to the books that we have, because many times they're going to have errors either in grammar or spelling. The hard thing is, even as you guys type on your iPads or your phones, or your computer, whatever, you're going to have these little red squiggly lines that show up under some of your words or sentences, basically saying this is not correct. They didn't have that at that point. There was no spell check or autocorrect. It was going to be based solely on how careful they were. So, unfortunately, a lot of the books at that point were very error prone. As a result, you're going to see that being a struggle for those that are reading. One of the guys, though, that says, I want to now be known for my caution, for my correctness. One of the guys that's going to be that is a guy that belonged to the order known as the Benedictines. He was a monk, a guy by the name of the Venerable, that means respected, Bede, Venerable Bede. As you guys perhaps talk to your parents, some of them might say, oh yeah, I've heard of that guy. Others maybe not so much, but the Venerable Bede. After 1000 AD, you're going to start to see these schools beginning to grow. Instead of it only being connected with religious topics or kind of the academic realm, they're starting to say, you know what, we don't want only people that would be going into the priesthood to get an education. We want it to be available, even not just to everybody, but at least to the nobility. Boys that are not going to be going into any work at all connected to the church still valued or wanted an education. And so they said, we're going to now open it up a little bit broader. Here and there would also be an opportunity for a poorer person, a serf, to be given an education. Almost exclusively, though, they were excluded. They were basically told, you can go out and work on the fields. That's where you're going to be your whole life anyway. Even if you have a sharp mind, that can be used within the crop, planting, whatever, but it's not going to be seen or exercised in the classroom. There's just no need. And so we're not going to push that area anymore. One of the few exceptions was a guy by the name of Gerbert. He was a serf who was going to rise from a very poor family to a place of acclaim and knowledge. In fact, he gets so far along that he's going to end up becoming the Pope. This guy, even though we had said most education isn't going to go in the religious direction, this guy said, that's what I want to do with my life. So a guy by the name of Gerbert is going to be able to see that continue. We'll talk about him a little bit at the beginning of our last lesson here before Easter. We'll start with Gerbert, and then we'll talk a little bit more, just one more slide about education, and then we'll talk a little bit as we conclude about the Black Plague, and then we will be done with the Middle Ages. We'll go to break. We'll have that week and a half or so off, and then we'll be ready to finish out the school year. Pretty amazing. You guys have a great afternoon, and I will see you on Wednesday.